Without preamble, the door swung open with a rush and a woman ran into the office. She was waving a paper in one hand, but this was not the only evidence of her excitement. Aside from the waved paper and an obviously breathless appearance, the woman spoke as soon as she was within sight of the other man behind the desk.
Professor Milton has resigned!
The man behind the desk smiled resignedly.
Don't be too concerned, Dr. Harris. Professor Milton has resigned before. He always comes back.
Dr. Harris shook her head. Her agitation did not diminish, despite the calm composure of the man behind the desk.
Dr. Edwards, you don't really understand.
Look, Harris, is there anything we can do about it?
No.
Admitted Harris uncomfortably.
But you don't know what he'll be doing next.
She handed the paper to the quiet man behind the desk. Dr. Edwards read.
Dear Dr. Edwards, it has come to my attention that the world is in a high state of confusion. Under these trying circumstances, I feel moved to do something constructive about it. Ergo, I made formal resignation, knowing that a request for even a brief leave of absence would not be granted. Have no lasting fear. I may return once I have accomplished the reinstatement of peace and quiet in this troubled world. Sincerely yours, Paul Monroe Milton, Ph.D.
Dr. Edwards shrugged.
This time it is the state of the world,
he said. His voice held a twinge of amusement.
You're not really worried?
Of course not. There is no single man on Earth capable of untangling the mess of the century.
I wonder.
Why?
Professor Milton is a literal-minded genius, and a bit of a screwball. A more brilliant man has seldom existed on this Earth. But he reminds me somewhat of a powerful machine running wild. Neither he nor a machine has much judgment.
But what are you worried about?
Remember the time he said, "Nothing is impossible," and was instantly told to try scratching a match on a bar of soap?
You bet. Milton invented a safety match that would light only when scratched on a soft, moist bar of soap. Nowhere else.
Uh-huh. And a bit of common sense added to that kind of genius might have brought forth a real safety match that might be worth millions to the institution. What I'm a bit worried about is just what angle his rather literal mind will follow.
No matter. We can stop him once we know, and Professor Milton is not an unknown figure. We'll wait and watch carefully.
Dr. Harris nodded slowly. She was sensible enough to know that the professor was missing completely, and no matter how dangerous it might be, nothing could be done until Professor Milton did something to smoke himself out into the open. She left Dr. Edwards' office determined to keep a close eye on newspaper and a sharp ear on the radio commentators. The General Assembly of the United Nations came to order after prolonged applause. The chairwoman nodded genially and spoke into the microphones on her desk. Her words were translated for those who did not understand her tongue, but no man present was unaware of the importance of the figure beside her. Pictures have no tongue, and Professor Milton was a genius.
Gentlemen, this may seem irregular. However, Professor Milton comes before us to explain a plan he has evolved for the continued peace and satisfaction of the world. A world made desperate by continued disagreement. We need no previews of his plan because we know that Milton seldom presents any solution that is not workable. I relinquish the rostrum to Professor Paul Monroe Milton.
More thunderous applause.
Gentlemen of the United Nations, it is not my purpose to decide who is right in these everlasting disagreements. Without a doubt, each side has its own personal reasons for believing as it does. Otherwise, there would be no disagreement. However, it stands that the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics wants to rule a certain part of the world in their own manner, which is anathema to the United States of America. Similarly, the United States of America prefers to see the world operating under a manner favorable to its principles of democracy. Because of this, no agreement has been reached. An impasse has obtained for years. My plan is simple. Let us divide the world into two equal parts and each go our own way, ruling each according to our own ideals. I offer you two worlds for one.
Professor Milton seated himself. The General Assembly was quiet for a moment, then all broke into a roar of scornful laughter.
I fear that Professor Milton does not quite understand. My dear Professor Milton, we agree in the whole. The main argument is not that we should do this. The question at hand is how to get along after the world is divided.
Fools! Idiots! You think it will not work?
He was interrupted by more roars of laughter.
Imbeciles! Must I demonstrate?
Just how do you propose to effect this division?
By application of gravitic field theory.
The Russian delegate arose, was recognized, and said,
Professor Milton's suggestion sounds uncomfortable. I fully believe that no one will find fault with Russia if I exercise my power to veto on this suggestion.
He seated himself among wild cheers, laughter, and applause. In the excitement, Professor Milton left. Carla Ingalls of the FBI smiled tolerantly.
I see no reason to be upset.
Doctors Edwards and Harris shook their heads in unison.
You don't understand. Recall his words,
Of course.
and you apply no importance to them.
His theory sounds reasonable. Let Russia run her section.
Harris snorted excitedly. She slapped the newspaper with the back of his hand.
Divide the world. Have you any idea what that would mean?
Why? It still sounds sensible.